how does this relate to childhood? So when we're children, we learn behaviours that keep us safe and well connected to our parents. We depend on them for our survival. So this is a very primitive mechanism and is called the attachment stage of our development. But as adults, we see any threat to our survival as a red danger signal, and we revert very fast to flight, fight or freeze responses. We learned the best adaptation, the best way to protect ourselves when we were very young. So now we're going to look at what wound, in which different stage, and which adaptation we learned to enable us to survive. The attachment stage of human development lasts from birth to about 10 to 18 months. These stages overlap. From about 10 months, the infant is also moving into the next stage called exploration. If the parents are inconsistently available, perhaps because there's other children, or their lives are busy, or they're distracted, or they have problems like addiction, or they're depressed, or they have another mental illness, the infant will not feel that their parents are there for them. This unavailability may come across with a cold sense of rejection that creates a sense that they're unwanted. The primal childhood fear is of being annihilated and losing their core selves, which they need for adult survival. And this goes on at a very deep level. In a relationship, this manifests as them being overwhelmed by their partner's demands, and they avoid or withdraw to protect themselves. Their partner will see them as disappearing or not being there. The clinger, on the other hand, sees their partner's defensiveness as the problem. They too fear a loss of self, but by abandonment, caused by unavailable, inconsistent parenting combined with a sense of warmth. This is a very simplistic explanation of what is known as Bowlby's attachment theory woundings. John Bowlby was an early developmental psychologist who came up with different types of wounding at the attachment stage. These are defined by the way that we behave in our adult relationships, so you could be secure, ambivalent, preoccupied, avoidant, dismissive or disorganized, or a combination of several of them. Your partner will have a similar wounding to yours, but protect themselves against it with an opposite emotional adaptation, which is why your partner sometimes feels so different from you. You may be a distancer and your partner a clinger, for example. If you have a wounding at the attachment stage, that is before 18 months old, you may feel broken or damaged or unable to understand why you behave the way you do, because the wound and the consequent adaptation happened so early. But all that has happened is that your brain is really doing its best to protect you from the environment you're in. And the fact that your secure attachment has been interrupted by factors and issues that are most likely external to your family that have meant that your primary caregivers were unavailable to you or damaging. If you feel that you're on your own in life, for example, it may be that your primary caregivers were not attuned to your needs as a baby. As a result, you've had to rely on yourself. It will not be easy for you to ask for help, because when you did that as a baby, it didn't get you what you needed. Your brain has created an avoidant adaptation, which emerges as an adult as lack of need and over-independence, to ensure that you can manage your own needs and self-regulate. This can be perceived by your partner as being strong and independent, but you know that underneath you're as vulnerable and needy as anyone else. They may think that you're pushing them away, but you really need them to be there for you. If, on the other hand, you blow hot and cold and your partner never really knows where they stand with you, it may be that you developed an ambivalent attachment to cope with the turmoil that was your childhood. You never knew what to expect at home, and living with your primary caregivers was like walking on eggshells. Your brain developed distrust and anxiety around the unpredictability of having your needs met one day and not the next. Yet you constantly hope for someone you can rely on. At the same time, you live with the uncertainty that you sometimes create for yourself. Your partner complains of mixed messages and unreliability, but inside you are desperate for consistency and a steady rock to lean on. And the good news is that just as your brain adapted and modified as a child to hide the most vulnerable parts of you and to cope with your environment, you can use this same function called neuroplasticity to learn new behaviours and relationship skills. You will be able to stop years of habitual responses and use other responses that are more conducive to a healthy, happy relationship. Although, to be honest, it is most likely to take a number of sessions with a trained therapist to enable this to happen. After the attachment stage comes the exploration stage. This is when the baby starts to crawl and walk away from the caregivers. If you see toddlers doing this, you'll notice that they constantly look back to check that mum is still there and still not too far away. Gradually they will explore further afield with more confidence, but if mum is unreliable, then other woundings can be caused. This is the stage from about 10 months to 4 years and overlaps with the attachment stage and the identity stage. At this time, you'll see small children trying to explore the world around them. If their parent is too fearful, that transmits to the child, who comes to think the world is a scary place and they are not competent enough to survive. A parent who is too cavalier and insists on independence before the child is ready will create a sense of insecurity and a difficulty in trusting. The child who is uncertain that their parents are going to be there for them will take longer to be confident enough to be fully curious, because they are worrying about whether their parent has disappeared altogether. So the person whose parents were over-involved and overprotective, what we now call helicopter parents, will lead to the child feeling smothered and as though they are unable to work out life on their own. The childhood wound is of being smothered and the fear of losing that parent or losing their identity and sense of self. They come into my therapy room describing a fear of their partners pursuing and smothering them, and they protect themselves by distancing themselves from their partner. This is exactly the thing that their partners fear the most. Their partners are usually those whose parents were neglectful and underprotective. Their childhood wounds was one of being neglected and the sense that they weren't worth protecting. They fear their partner's rigid approach to life and relationships, which appears perfectly reasonable and safe to them, and they respond by pursuing their partner, exactly what their partner fears the most. This is the stage for about 3 years to 8 years and later, when we are exploring our identity and who we are in the world. A parent who is critical and undermining will create a child uncertain in its own skin, while the child of a parent who dictates and controls will try and duck and hide when it feels the same in its adult relationships. I see couples where one is highly manipulative and controlling, wanting to dictate and micromanage their partner's behaviour down to the smallest detail, and the more their partner becomes diffuse or backs off or refuses to comply, the more they need to control. To be diffuse means to be soft, rather than rigid in your boundaries or character. You appear more gentle or vague than rule-based and strong. But this can be misleading, because a diffuse person can appear weak, but in fact they are often really strong deep down, but with a marshmallow kind of superficial feel or appearance. Equally, people who appear rigid can be really soft underneath and able to be more flexible than they appear on the surface. So that you can see there's a push-pull dynamic that emerges between these couples who are a good match because they were wounded at a similar stage. Each one has an opposite adaptation to their partners, and this is the source of their irritations or arguments. From the age of about 5 to 18, we are stretching and exploring ourselves. We feel into what we are good at, what appeals to us less, and find our own strengths and weaknesses. We need our parents to be non-judgmental but gently guiding, and not criticize or shame us when we don't get things right. Their expectations should be in what we call the Goldilocks zone, not too demanding, not too low. It's hard to get it right, and it's hardly surprising that many parents struggle and the kids get wounded. The fact is that no one escapes childhood unwounded. We're all damaged to some degree or another. Yet that's what makes us resilient, which is essential to enable us to cope with the slings and arrows of life. There are other developmental stages too, such as the social concern or intimacy stages, when we are wounded by parents who are either too rigid or too liberal. The consequential adaptations are to be manipulators or to be caretakers. So we're just touching on these to help you better understand yourself. In therapy, you can deep dive into each stage and wound more freely, but for now I hope you're gaining the benefit of just awareness.